I guess the biggest like thing that's put the bike park on the global scene in the last 18 months or so is Hardline Tasmania. First off, like what attracted you to try and get that event? I assume like you pitched them rather than them coming to you. Like how does that all happen?
Yeah, look, quite honestly, there wasn't a pitch. So we basically had been working with Red Bull and a few of their athletes for a while. So we're a pretty popular place for people to come and shoot content because we're quite flexible in what we can do, but it's also just a really stunning environment. So we do get a lot of athletes and brands wanting to do product launches and content shoots here. So we'd worked with a few Red Bull athletes and their Red Bull management team to shoot quite a few different things here over the years. And it got to the point where essentially it was really just an organic discussion over the period of a year or so where we were chatting about events and we had a few ideas. And then I think they put it to us, were we interested or did we think that we could look at something like Hardline, because Red Bull Australia were as a company looking for another big event, a big annual event, and they weren't really sure what they wanted it to be. And they were pretty keen to do something in the mountain bike space. They were obviously familiar with Hardline and they were looking for a venue and asked us whether we were interested. And I said, look, I've only seen the broadcast. I've never been to the venue. And like from my perspective, I think we can do it, but I also really need to go over there and have a look. So at that point, like one of the things I've always been really big on is going and visiting all the other bike park operations around the world that I can get to and networking with that group of people. We're obviously a pretty small cohort. So when I first started, and we're much smaller when we started, but when I first started putting the plans for the park together, one of the first groups I went over to were in Wales to go and chat to Bike Park Wales. Those guys have become good mates, and you know they had a very similar operation at that point to what we wanted to build. So I went over and met them, and basically continued on around the world, meeting a whole bunch of others. But from a Hardline point of view, I'd wanted to go over to Derby Bike Park for quite a while anyway, and I'd had a bunch of mates who'd been, and I'd been to Europe a couple of times since they've been open, but I just hadn't made it across. So we were actually due to be in Europe anyway. We were doing a work trip over there just to go to a World Cup and catch up with a few people. We were chatting to the Warner Brothers guys and doing a few things while we were over there. So I basically just added a trip to Derby, reached out to Dan Atherton and one of our staff, actually, an old friend of mine, but he'd worked for us and for the Athertons. He was over there working for them and he ended up taking us out. Dan ended up just swamped at the bike park with a couple of injuries, I think, that day. So we caught up with him later. But went and walked the course at Derby, just around from Derby, with a couple of his crew. And look, it was definitely eye-opening. I've been around the mountain bike scene for quite a while, and I like to think I've seen most things, but Hardline is definitely something else. I've really become desensitized to it now. I take people up on our course and people are just losing their minds, and I'm sort of like, it's not that big a deal. It's pretty straightforward. But when you're standing on those big features, I mean, particularly in Wales too, it's a pretty rugged, wild kind of environment, and you've got all that weather as well. But I kind of looked at it and thought, oh man, I don't know if we really can do this. It's ridiculous. But after we'd kind of sat on it for a little while, I'd hatched up a bit of a plan. And when I got back, I spent a whole lot of time up on the hill. I mean, I know our hill pretty well, as you can probably imagine. I spent a fair bit of time up there, but there were some areas that I thought would work and some areas that I thought had some potential, and really spent quite a bit of time up there before we had more discussions with Red Bull. And got to a point where I said, look, I really do think we can do this. There's a lot of challenges to build the event around such a small town, and, broadcast and infrastructure and power. And like for us, we essentially have to build a small town to host the event every year in terms of power grid and broadcast trucks. And like we're building essentially water, town water infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure all, each year for the event. We have to build a camping village for the athletes. There's not enough accommodation in town and we want them to all be together. So this year, certainly we're doing a lot more work in that space and really building out a really cool spot for the athletes to be. But it's a lot more than just a course on a hill. For us, the course was obviously the hero and something we really wanted to put everything we had into, but there's a lot more that we had to sort out as well and kind of figure out a way to do that. So I think it's about 4 months out from the first hardline that we actually signed contracts with Red Bull. So we were pretty adamant that it was going to happen on both sides from about 6 months to go. So we were kind of getting going. We were building our team out and getting ready to get started. But it was only really a little bit over 4 months out from the event that we actually started building the course, which was 100% built from scratch. So it was very much a rush to pull that thing together.
Yeah, insane, because like Hardline Wales, I guess, has had over 10 years of development to get to where it is now, and it was definitely a fairly different beast in the early days. So yeah, a lot of work to do. Talk us through it. Like, obviously you've gone up on the hill and you've scouted and worked out kind of roughly where you want to take things. Once you've got that feel for it, how do you go about like putting shovels in earth and turning it into what you created? Because that looks like a lot more than 4 months work.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot more than 4 months work. Look, basically we put a course, I put a course concept together, and then, so Darcy Cootes works for us. He raced Hardline last year. He ended up with a broken collarbone prior to the event and qualified fifth, but ended up, his collarbone, the plate they'd put in his collarbone actually bent during the qualifying. So he ended up not racing. But Darcy was pretty heavily, so he's led the construction project here, and he's just been incredible to work. I mean, Darcy's worked with us for years, but just an incredible vision in terms of the way he interpreted the hill. But the overall course layout and the features and all the dimensions and things were something that I'd worked on, and then you got further input from the crew after I'd kind of put together that broad plan. I'd probably walked the hill. The final course, I reckon I walked it about 20, 25 times, the whole alignment. And then there was many more than that across other alignments. So I'd kind of worn the course in with my feet before we started building it anyway. But yeah, it was quite a bit of work. We ended up with probably about 15 to 17 staff on average building across the project. So we had a lot of other projects on at the time. Like, I think we probably had a team of 80, 90 staff working around the country at the time. But we're a little bit smaller right now. But at that point in time, we were definitely flat out. I was spending a lot of my time here with the team, just obviously very, very close eye on exactly what was happening up there. Generally, I let our team get a little bit carried away and do their thing because, we're building standard trails, and those guys are amazing at it. They don't need me breathing down the back of their neck. But when we're building something at this kind of scale, with that kind of consequence and challenge, like I really wanted to be across it all the time. So we ended up we had an incredible team of staff, and everyone's worked, around the clock over that 4 months to pull it together in time. And we got there I think definitely but yeah, it was definitely a big push. Probably the biggest challenge with the design was that the hill's big, but there's definitely a flatter portion in the middle of the hill, which is, if you've seen the broadcast, we call it the fernery. It's where we had the FPV drones flying through the ferns. So when we walked that sectional course with the team from Wales, Dan, and a few of the Red Bull staff, they were really concerned that section was going to be boring and flat. I sort of had a different view. I felt that we were going to carry in quite a bit of speed and everything would be just fine, but they definitely got me worried. So we basically, we built up the biggest level of entry speed we possibly could with the course alignment into that section, and then just let the team go crazy through there and just built like a super highway through the ferns. And it ended up actually being one of the fastest bits on the course, and it was super cool. But that was one of our biggest concerns from a design point of view. It's like, if we get to this section and it's just slow and dead, it's really going to kill the race. So I was very happy when we got that section done, and it all worked out okay. But yeah, the way the hill works, it's sort of rocky, rugged, more technical at the top, and then the bottom of the hill is just this perfect kind of buttery clay. So we ended up doing a lot of the bigger features in terms of big jumps at the lower half of the hill.
Yeah. And with the big features, like, are you using maths for this kind of stuff and the design? Is it based on feel and experience? Maybe there's a combination of the two. Like, how are you building stuff that you're pretty confident is going to be right or close to right first time?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. And look, it was one of those things where the view from Dan and his team from Wales was very much that Hardline needs to push the limits of the sport, and there was definitely a feeling that because our site wasn't quite so rugged and not quite so wild in terms of that really craggy, harsh rock in Wales, that we would really need to push the jumps and the other features to a level beyond Wales to ensure that it was very much at the cusp. And I think at the time, Dan kind of put it that, you know, if those top riders are here and they're looking at the course for the first time and they're not questioning if it's possible, and if they're not terrified, then it's not hard enough, which... When you're dealing with, you know, the top riders in the world that are used to sending themselves off ludicrous things is a pretty scary thing to have to work to. So, and look, it is a fine balance. Like, there's also that side of, like, we want everyone, or I want, from my point of view, I think the majority of riders that come to Hardline and are invited to Hardline should be able to ride Hardline. You don't want a race where only half the field gets through. It's not good for anyone. But more importantly than that, I mean, we don't want people to get hurt. Like, it is very much pushing the limits, but we want those features to work, and we want them to be achievable, and we want them to function when people are tired, and function if they're not quite on the right line in a racing scenario. So it's a very, very fine balance. And for us, we did want those features to be huge, and we did want them in areas that really showcase that really epic kind of rainforest that we've got to work with. But then equally, we've got to put them in areas where, from a medical point of view, we can get in there with a team and get someone out if they do come unstuck. So it is a really fine balance in trying to put all of that together.